Springtime is here, and as we shared last month, Florida's spring housing market got off to a good start in March. But how did it fare in April? Well, let's take a look at the latest housing market statistics from Florida Realtors to find out. We can start by looking at closed home sales in April. For single-family homes, closed sales were a little bit down from March. But remember, we don't always learn a lot by comparing housing market statistics from one month to the next. That's especially true for metrics like closed sales, which are very seasonal and can be impacted by quirks that are unique to each month. April only has 30 days, for instance, while March has 31. You might not think one day makes a difference, but technically that means that April has about 3% fewer days than March. So there's already a built-in 3% impact to the downside for April right there. And it's not unusual to see sales drop from March to April either. We also saw it happen recently in both 2022 and 2023. In both those cases, though, sales popped right back up in May. That said, it's almost always better to take a look at year-over-year changes in our housing metrics. And by that, I mean let's compare this April to April of last year. Notably, Easter fell in April both this year and last year, so we should be able to make a pretty good comparison here. So, when we do that, we see that closed sales of single-family homes in Florida were up year over year for the 8th consecutive month in April, this time rising by nearly 2.5%. That's the smallest year-over-year percent increase we've observed during our 8-month streak. But hey, an increase is still an increase. Still, if you're worried that our streak is in jeopardy, then you'll want to look at a more forward-looking statistic, new pending sales. Let's do that now. Remember, with new pending sales, we're counting how many homes for sale went under contract during the month, as opposed to closed sales, where we count how many sales were finalized, with house keys passing into the hands of new homeowners. Since homes go under contract typically a month or two before the sale actually closes, particularly if mortgage financing is involved, new pending sales are a leading indicator of what closed sales will be a month or two later. They're not a perfect leading indicator, since not all homes that go under contract end up with a closed sale, but they're still one of the best ones out there. One of the first things you might notice is that new pending sales for single-family homes in Florida were up year over year quite a bit in January, but in February and March, they were up more modestly. That's why the small year-over-year increase in closed sales for April did not come as a big surprise. We've known for a couple of months now that new pending sales were seeing small increases as well. But now, take a look at April's new pending sales. Here we see an 8% year-over-year increase, which is more than double the increases we saw in each of the previous 2 months. As a result, I think we can be pretty confident that our run of rising closed sales will continue into May, and likely June. Only time will tell. Now, let's move on to closed sales over in the condo and townhouse property type category. While we didn't match March's 12% increase in this category, we were still up by just about 7% year over year in April, and that's more than double what the percentage increase was for single-family homes, which is a continuation of a trend we've seen for a while now. Remember, a number of safety regulations for condos were enacted 3 years ago, and initially these had a negative impact on sales in this category due to rising condo fees and difficulties in the mortgage and insurance markets. But we made it through that initial adjustment period, and now the condo market is starting to make up some of the ground it lost relative to the single-family market. Given that housing affordability is still a challenge across the state, other things equal, condos remain one of the more affordable options in many local Florida markets. If we look at new pending sales of condos and townhouses, we can also get an indication that this property type category will very likely continue to outperform single-family homes in year-over-year sales growth over the next couple of months as well. New pending sales of Florida condos and townhouses in April increased by nearly 15%. Let's move on now to new listings, the number of properties that came onto the market in each month. In the single-family home category, the year started with a burst of new listings in January, but that turned out to be an anomaly. Since then, we've had 3 straight months where new listings have been down year over year, including a nearly 8% decline in April. Context is important here, though. We're comparing to 2025, which had an unusually high number of new listings relative to recent years. If we compare what we've seen in new listings so far this year to, say, 2019, the year before the COVID pandemic began, then aside from January, we've almost been in perfect lockstep. Over in the condo and townhouse category, new listings have similarly been in line with 2019 levels since February. And likewise, they've also been down relative to last year, falling by about 12% in April. With the marginal increases we've seen in sales, combined with new listings settling down to a normal level, unsurprisingly, inventory levels have been on the decline as well. In April, the end-of-month inventory of active single-family home listings was down for the third consecutive month, on both a month-over-month and year-over-year basis. Compared to a year ago, we ended April with almost 14% fewer single-family homes on the market. At this juncture, our active inventory of single-family homes is only a little over 7% higher than it was at this time in 2019. The inventory of condos and townhouses for sale in Florida was down by 13.5% year over year in April, so very much the same decline that we saw for single-family homes. The difference here with condos and townhouses is that the current inventory level remains close to 16% higher than its 2019 level. But if we look now at both single-family home and condo and townhouse inventory in the long term, we see that where we're at now is much more comparable to inventory levels we saw from 2014 into 2020 than it is to levels we were seeing back in 2008 and 2009 as we dealt with the foreclosure crisis and Great Recession. Inventory levels in a few local markets in Florida do remain high, but inventory levels are not currently a problem for the Florida housing market at the statewide level. It's important to remember that the number of homes on the market at the end of the month, which is what we count as inventory, can be greatly influenced by how long properties are sitting on the market before going under contract or otherwise going off market. That's why even though new listings were really high in 2021, end-of-month inventory levels were really low because all those new listings were selling so quickly. Many of them never even got counted among the end-of-month inventory for the month that they were listed. In both today's market and the pre-pandemic market, listings would typically stay on the market quite a bit longer than they did during the pandemic boom. So today, for example, when we are counting the end-of-month inventory, we're including all of the new listings from this month that have not yet sold or gone off market yet, but also any properties listed in previous months that are still on the market as well. In this way, time on market has a major influence on how many properties you'll see for sale at any given point in time. One of the metrics we track at Florida Realtors is the median number of days from the listing date to the contract date for all sales that close each month. Among Florida single-family home sales that closed in April, the median number of days between their listing dates and the dates they went under contract was 44. That means that about half of the single-family home sales in April were for homes that were on the market less than 44 days, and the other half were on the market for more than 44 days. That's only 1 day longer than what we observed at this time last year. It's also notable that this statistic has been converging since the beginning of the year, when the gap was wider. In the first quarter of this year, this statistic was pretty high relative to recent years. We see the same thing when we compare this year to 2019, which itself had the highest readings for this metric compared to any year thereafter up until this year. But looking at April, we're right in the same place we were in 2019 at 44 days. So even though in April we had a similar median time on market for closed sales of single-family homes compared to both 2019 and 2025, if you look at what happened after April in both of those comparison years, you can see that even though they started similarly, they ended up in very different places. In 2019, time on market kind of settled down into the summer and remained pretty consistent the remainder of the year. Whereas last year, time on market grew significantly over the remainder of the year. So one question we might ask ourselves is, which path will 2026 take? Well, we don't quite know that yet. It could follow the 2019 path or the 2025 path, or strike out on its own in some other direction. Maybe it falls below the 2019 path. The important thing to know is, if homes start selling more quickly, that will bring inventory levels down. and tighter inventory almost always means a little more upward pressure on home prices. While we're here, let's also take a look at median time from list to contract for closed sales of condos and townhouses. Here you can see that in both 2019 and 2025, the pattern was somewhat similar to what we saw for single-family homes. And so far this year, condos and townhouses have taken longer to sell in either of those years. In April, the median number of days from list to contract was 60. That's 4 more days than a year ago, so it's not an astronomical difference, but it's still 9 days above what we were at in 2019. Chalk part of that up to the more complicated environment in this market that the safety regulations and reserve requirements bring. Still, this is a stat to watch over the next coming months. Looking over the long term at this metric for both property type categories, we see time on market for single-family homes is roughly the same as it was from 2016 through 2019, maybe a little bit higher, while time on market for condos and townhouses is just a bit north of the 2014 through 2019 trend overall. Clearly, there has been much more of an increase in time on market for condos and townhouses relative to single-family homes. But for a sanity check, let's also look back at 2008 just to remind ourselves that this is certainly not the slowest market we've seen in recent memory. Before we move on, take one last look at this chart. You might notice something familiar about the shape of it. If you thought, hey, that looks like the inventory chart, you'd be correct. This chart is a little more noisy because time on market is very seasonal compared to inventory level, but essentially the trends are the same for both metrics. That's just a reflection of what I was talking about earlier, that time on market and inventory levels very much go hand in hand. All right, let's wrap this video up with home sale prices. With inventory continuing to stabilize, we don't have much expectation of significant shifts in home prices anytime soon, and the price statistics continue to reflect this. The median price for closed single-family home sales in Florida in April was about 1.8% higher than in April of last year, rising to $420,000. That's the same percent increase we saw in March as well. And over in the condo and townhouse category, the median sale price was unchanged from a year ago at $315,000. And that's the same thing we saw in March as well. So again, we're seeing consistently low movement in home prices at the statewide level. I've gone on long enough for this month, so I'll leave the exploration of price trends at the local level to all of you. As always, Florida Realtors members have access to SunStats, our interactive web application for exploring Florida's housing market statistics at the local and state level. That's the perfect tool for the job. One thing I will say is that in parts of the state that had been seeing some of the more dramatic movements in prices over the last couple of years, I'm seeing the magnitudes of those price movements calm down as of late. Go check out your local statistics and see if that's true for your area. See you all next month.